Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We are now in our 15th episode of 2025. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. This is a very busy week in Washington, and while the White House and Congress are focused on tariffs and the budget, there are also a lot of activity in the telecom space on the Hill. Today, the Fiber Broadband Association is hosting Fiber Day on the Hill in the Rayburn building on Capitol Hill to help educate Congress, NTI, the FCC, and NTI and the administration on fiber broadband and its positive impact on the economy. The honorary co-chairs for our event are the House and Energy Commerce Committee Representative Dr. John Joyce out of Pennsylvania, our ranking member of the House Communications and Technology Subcommittee, Doris Matsui, and Senate Commerce Committee member Senator Jackie Rosen from Nevada. So there you go, Brian. You got a Nevada senator sponsoring our Fiber Day in the Hill. In addition to Fiber Day in the Hill, there's a lot of official congressional business taking place that impacts our sector. The Senate Commerce Committee will vote on the nomination of Ariel Roth to be the Assistant Secretary of Commerce and the NTI Director. So we're rooting for that. And then immediately afterwards, the committee will hold a confirmation hearing, consider the nomination of Olivia Trusty to fill the 5th commissioner spot at the FCC. And in the House, at the same time, the Energy Commerce Committee will hold a full committee hearing on converting energy into intelligence, the future of AI technology, human discovery, and American global competitiveness. As the Fiber Broadband Association works its way around North America, so far our regional Fiber Connect workshops in San Antonio and Philadelphia have been sold out events, and our annual conference, the Fiber Connect 2025, June 1st to 4th, is on track to setting a new attendance record. Last year we had about 5,000 people, and it looks like we're going to head a little bit north of that this year. So after Fiber Connect in Nashville, we'll be in Anchorage in July, Toronto in August, Spokane in September, Scottsdale in October, Kansas City in November, and then we wrap the year up with our premier member meeting at Palm Springs, December 8th and 9th. That brings us today's Five for Breakfast. Our guest today is Brian Mitchell, the director of the Nevada State Broadband Office, to discuss unlocking Nevada's digital future, the High-Speed Nevada Initiative. But before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you to everybody who's joined us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor, Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, as participants, you are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, please type it into the question box, which is located in the lower left-hand side of your screen. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours, and you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. Finally, at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. We really appreciate your input, so please take a moment to respond. And with that, I will hand things back over to Gary to once again introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, David, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guests were Evan Freeman, our Fiber Connect 2025 Chairman and the Vice President of Government Affairs at EPB in Chattanooga, and Rich Williams, our Fiber Connect 25 Program Director, who joined me for a fireside chat on the Fiber Connect 2025 Hot Seat. So if you missed that and want to know what's going to be happening at our conference, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today in Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is Brian Mitchell, the Director of the Nevada State Broadband Office, to discuss unlocking Nevada's digital future, the High-Speed Nevada Initiative. Brian serves as the Director of the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology, OSIT, the State of Nevada's Broadband Office, and oversees planning, mapping, and procurement of broadband infrastructure. Brian leads the state's High-Speed Nevada Initiative, a $1 billion program to achieve the goal of universal access to affordable, reliable, scalable broadband. So, Brian, welcome. And for our audience, please type in your questions, and we'll work those into the discussion. So, kind of kick us off, Brian, can you tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing on broadband and where you are?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Gary, and it's a pleasure to be with you. our initiative, we've called the High Speed Nevada Initiative, and it really started out with a needs assessment of where we are or where we were in Nevada a few years ago, and what we needed to do in order to achieve our goal of ensuring that every Nevadan has access to a high-speed internet connection that's affordable, reliable, and scalable. And so one of the things that we noticed right away is that in Nevada we lacked the level and the and the and the scale of middle mile infrastructure in order to ever meet our last mile goals. And so we knew that if we didn't have more middle mile and sufficient upstream bandwidth, that there were many markets that in our local internet service providers in Nevada would never consider serving because they simply couldn't get the bandwidth to serve those. So we started out in phase one of our initiative by identifying over 250 state government facilities as well as community anchor institutions. And then we invited local governments to include their locations as well, their local government facilities that were unserved. And together we had over 500 community anchor institutions and government facilities. And we bid those out and are building middle mile fiber infrastructure to those locations. These facilities are all located in unserved and underserved communities and will be the backbone that will eventually serve our last mile projects in phase three. In phase two of our initiative, we bid out a route, and you'll see that kind of in the orange and that maybe dark pink route that goes from Las Vegas north and then over to Reno across the entire width of the state. And so in phase two, we're building a state-owned middle mile network that will serve both the state as well as connect together all of the disparate locations throughout the state. And then in phase three, we went through our BEAD subgrantee selection process and through the NTIA initial and final proposal process, and are proud that we've brought forward a proposal that's been accepted by NTIA, and that will serve every single Nevadan, every unserved Nevadan, all about 52,000 locations in the state that were unserved. So those are the three phases of our project, leading off with middle mile and then finishing it out with the last mile.
So Brian, first of all, Nevada is not for sissies, right? I mean, that's of all the states. I mean, you have pretty tough topology, right? You got pretty much a little bit of everything there, especially a lot of mountains and hard rock and challenging terrain. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think we're the seventh largest state by land geography, but we're very urbanized populations. Most of our about 70% of the population in Nevada lives in Las Vegas. Another 20% or so lives in Reno, and so we have counties in this state that are larger than the smallest 9 East Coast states. Larger than New Jersey and larger than Maryland, and so almost as we have counties almost as big as West Virginia, and that makes it very challenging to serve people in such a large area that are so spread apart. We have a lot of no gas for 100 miles signs in Nevada, and so just the sheer distances between population centers is huge. Nevada is also home to I would say Nevada's land ownership is pretty unique among states, even Western states. 86% of Nevada's land is owned by the federal government. And so when it comes to, building fiber and constructing, deploying infrastructure of any sort, you're really limited in terms of kind of where you can go and how you can build, because, the permitting process is so ubiquitous across the state. So, those are some of the real big challenges. We've got very rocky soil. Our cost per foot is higher than other states, and so, and then we have limited pathways because of the federal land. Sometimes there's only one way to get from one place to another, and it's the long way.
Well, listen, you talked about $1 billion investment, yet your NTI allotment was 417 million. So tell us what money you stitched together to be able to get to these different phases of your projects.
Yeah, no one single funding source is sufficient to connect all Nevadans, and so we really had to work together with a lot of stakeholders to kind of cobble together different funding sources to bring things together. So I'll give a lot of credit to our state legislature and our governor's office, who allocated about $200 million in ARPA state fiscal recovery funds to broadband. And on top of that, we're using probably 2/3 of our capital projects fund allocation for middle mile, and then about 1/3 of our capital projects fund allocation for last mile. We were also fortunate to having received an NTIA middle mile grant, so we were aggressive at pursuing those funds, and that's funding part of one of our middle mile routes. We've also worked a lot with our tribal governments throughout the state and have been successful in securing nearly $40 million in tribal broadband connectivity funds. And the credit there goes to a number of different tribal organizations that have been very forward thinking about applying for those funds. We've also, Gary, we've utilized universal service funds through E-rate and the Rural Healthcare Fund. A lot of our schools prior to this were not on fiber, and we're still either using wireless or microwave links that just weren't sufficient for testing. They had to test kids over a significant period of time because not all kids could get into and do testing on a single day. So we're able to leverage a lot of E-rate funding to help us build networks that will be used to connect schools and then eventually connect communities.
So when you look at, we handicapped that you'd get to about 74% fiber would be best case with given the money you have. And when you looked at your final proposal, it looked like you got to about 80% fiber. So you really outperformed what we handicapped. How were you able to do that?
We took a very technology neutral approach to our last mile deployment through the BEAD program. And we had to because, as we've talked about, our geography is very tough. Our allocation was limited. We've never expected to have funds left over for non-deployment, and we didn't. We had to use every last penny to get to all of our locations. And so, for us, it was a technology neutral approach where, our philosophy was the best possible technology at the best possible cost for each individual project area. And that, and that meant, a very competitive process where, folks were competing, not just on, within their technology group, but across all technologies. We accepted all technology bids right from the start. We didn't start out with, only fiber bids and then moving on to something else. And so for us, it was, very much a competitive process. And at the end of the day, I think we're really proud of our result that, we tried to design our project areas and so as that they would be as attractive and competitive to as many different types of providers as we could. And providers, I think a big reason why providers were able to step up and build fiber to some locations that, maybe otherwise they wouldn't is because we built so much middle mile infrastructure during phase 1 and 2 that, folks didn't have to use BEAD funding to build middle mile to a small town. And so because we were already going there to either to the school or to the local health clinic or so on. So I think for us, we were quite pleased with the results and feel like we used our federal allocation in a very efficient manner in ensuring that the best technology and the right technology ended up serving every location.
So how would you break down the 20% that wasn't fiber? How much fixed wireless and other
Yeah,
other?
it was about 10% fixed wireless and about 10% satellite.
And now you did have some areas that Leo satellite did not bid on. What was the reason for that?
You know, there were some rural communities where there was a very in Nevada. It's kind of, we're different than a lot of states, and so a lot of rural communities, you'll see them very spread out. Folks are living on a lot of land. Maybe they're like in farming communities and or ranching communities. You've got a pretty significant number of people that live on, but everybody lives on 20, 40, 80 acres or maybe more, right? In Nevada, because we're such a dry state, there just isn't a lot of that kind of farming. And so people in rural areas live in very concentrated small towns, oftentimes. And so, what we were told by the satellite folks is that when you have that many people in such a small area, um, they, they just because of the logistics and the physics of satellite, they weren't always able to guarantee that they would be able to deliver a service that meets the BEAD specifications to that many users in such a small kind of concentrated area. And so in those cases, in those rural communities, fiber was the better and the cheaper solution. But there were plenty of other places in the state where fiber would have not been the best solution. And I know you're the fiber guy, Gary, but fiber's not, it wasn't, the best solution, there, for some folks who live, 40 miles away from any other person, right? And those people were best served by satellite, and that's kind of how we did it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we certainly support the states being able to be able to look at the full toolbox and pick the right technology that meets your topology and all your broadband service locations. So I think, the NTI waterfall makes a lot of sense. Get fiber where you can, fix wireless, the next option, and then alternative technology when you have to. Is that pretty much the way you guys looked at it?
I think for us, that obviously those were the rules in place at the time we went through our bidding process. I'm not sure that um, I don't know how things would have worked out if there had been a different way of doing things. But I think the ultimately the outcome that we came out with was one that I think, as I said before, puts the best possible technology at the best possible price in each project area. And so, the best technology in some places was fiber, and the best technology in other places was satellite. And we didn't try to overwhelm satellite by putting it in, very concentrated, high density urban areas, and likewise didn't try to put fiber in, very low density rural areas. And so, it was ultimately, our mix worked for us, but I don't know that I would recommend it for any other state, which is why I think, the BEAD program, works so well, is that every state is able to assess what their needs are and then put forward a solution that meets those needs.
No, I think it's really important that the states be in control of how they spend their money because at the end of the day, you guys are the ones that have to look your constituents in the eye and, going to be fully accountable. So congratulations on that. Now, you mentioned that, so you're one of the three states that have, submitted your final proposals. And I think you mentioned that yours is approved. Is that right?
Yes, our final proposal was approved by NTIA.
And so, are when do you think you'll see shovels in the ground?
So right now we're going through a process of working with our selected providers, our awarded providers, and we're getting ready to sign contracts. So we're going back and forth on that whole process. I think we have providers that are ready to put shovels in the ground and can get folks connected starting this summer. So, we're, as a state, and our providers are ready to deploy. And, as soon as, we get kind of the right paperwork from, from NIST, then, I think we'll start to see, both groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings happen starting this summer and also into the fall.
So you're still waiting on the NIST approvals then?
Yeah, it's a bit of an esoteric, or maybe, it's a bit of a technical process, but essentially NTIA is the approver at like a programmatic level, and then NIST is another sub-agency within the Department of Commerce, and they act as NTIA's grants administrator. And so once your final proposal has been approved by NTIA, then it goes for another level of review of your budget and, and of your numbers and everything at NIST. And once that review happens, so NIST isn't necessarily reviewing, is 80% fiber the right number, or is it, it should be lower or higher or whatnot. But they're doing a numbers check. And then, once that numbers check is complete, then, and we're given a green light, then we'll be good to go.
Well, fantastic. Congratulations. So tell us a little bit about, now that you've been through this whole process, what kind of best practices, what were the kind of things that you can advise others to look at, or maybe some things that are just unique to Nevada?
Yeah. So I think it's tough to kind of come up with best practices, just because every state is so different and in different places, and there really isn't kind of one size fits all. I mean, I think what we did was a great process for Nevada, but it's not necessarily the best process for any other state. And and I think every state did a good job with stakeholder and public engagement. For us, I think one of our best practices is really, and it was just born out of necessity, right? Because we knew we weren't going to have enough money, is to really leverage as many different funding sources as possible and weave those together in ways, to meet whatever the needs are in the community. I think, we had pretty good communication all along the way with the career staff at NTIA, and who were really fantastic in helping us kind of move things along, and ultimately, I think it being able to just get things in place, and then and get to the point where we are today was in large part because of the willingness of the folks at NTIA to work with us.
So obviously tribal's pretty relevant to Nevada. Can you talk a little bit about, you said you were able to tap into some tribal broadband funds, but getting middle mile and getting these tribal areas connected is critical. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to collaborate on funding and just overall design implementation for those areas?
Yeah, sure. So in Nevada, we have 28 federally recognized tribes. There are a few that are located in urban areas, but most of them are in the most rural areas of the state. And so in Nevada, we're very lucky that we have an organization, a nonprofit called the Intertribal Council of Nevada, which is kind of the United Nations of tribes in the state. And they advocate on behalf of tribes, and then also manage a number of different federal programs. And so we worked with the Intertribal Council to apply for tribal broadband connectivity grants at NTIA, and they were able to support a number of tribes in the initial TBCP round to apply for both deployment and adoption and use funding. Then at TBCP2, we went around to many of the remaining tribes who were interested and didn't apply through the Intertribal Council consortia, and worked individually with tribes to provide technical assistance as they were interested to apply for funds. And many of those applications were successful. One application that that I'll talk about just really briefly is there's a tribe that is on the Nevada-Idaho border, the Shoshone-Paiute tribe, and the tribe. It's interesting that or it's unfortunate, I should say, that their school there was constructed on a site that was later found out to have been contaminated by the government and through dumping of some toxic waste there many years ago. And so a lot of their kids were getting sick. And so they worked with the Nevada legislature to start constructing a new school. And then we were able to use a combination of dollars from E-rate to bring fiber to the new school, supplemented with state fiscal recovery dollars from ARPA. And then we are using TVCP dollars then to build off of that fiber to connect the rest of the 530 or so locations within that tribe. And just in case anyone from USAC is listening, the fiber from E-rate is cost allocated out, and the funding or the fiber that's going to the to the last mile is being paid for by ARPA. So just want to make sure I throw that in there. But it's a really good way to weave together different funding sources to hit multiple different objectives.
And then again, you had mentioned briefly that obviously a lot of federal lands. You got tribal lands, federal lands. Just to get permitting, is there any best practices or any advice you can provide other states on how to work with the different landship owners to get permitting accomplished?
Permitting is definitely a challenge. On a lot of fronts, it's a very complicated and there's a lot of process built into it. And so, we've engaged our state BLM office early and often, and and have built relationships there where we can pick up the phone and and ask questions and talk. That hasn't turned the process into that hasn't become like a 30-day process to get a permit. I wish it had. And we're still kind of working through issues with them, but I feel like building relationships in person, with the hardworking folks at BLM who manage that process and own and manage the land has been well worth it for us. So that if one of our providers kind of gets stuck in the process, we can try to translate. All right, what information are they looking for? What information do you need to provide, and so on. And so, it's definitely not easy, but it's we're doing our best.
Well, Brian, just congratulations, and really appreciate everything you're doing for the citizens in Nevada. Just getting not only tribes connected, schools, anchor institutions, and all these unserved folks. I know it's a huge job, and we're greatly appreciative of your efforts, and all those efforts of your fellow state broadband offices. To really build out our nation's critical broadband infrastructure. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and look forward to getting back together next Wednesday. We're going to have Brian Worthen, the CEO of Visionary Broadband, discuss bringing 5 gigabits fiber internet to Cannon City, Colorado. So you're not going to want to miss that. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Brian, and look forward to seeing you at Fiber Connect in Nashville in I guess June 1st to 4th. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.